Well, hello there. My name is Lenny Hernandez, and I'm the host of Arrow's Diversity and Inclusion Speaker Series. The purpose of this series is to provide information, insight, and empathy into experiences, walks of life, and causes that many of us may not have previously had the opportunity to learn about. Our job here at Arrow is to build community, and ensuring that everyone feels understood and welcomed is one of the most important aspects of that job. And we believe that doesn't just stop at our front doors. Today, I'd like to introduce to you Whitney Shumway, a social worker and chair of the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, Missouri chapter. She sat down with Jim Helmuth, a resident of Vitalia Montrose, for a discussion about suicide prevention. They talked about why someone might attempt suicide, what behaviors may indicate suicidal thoughts, what someone might do to help those who are considering suicide, and so much more. If you or someone you know is having a suicidal or mental health crisis, dial 988 to connect to a mental health professional.
Suicide is something that is so complex. It requires a complex system to help heal.
I see trees of green, red roses too. I see them bloom for me and for you. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world.
Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to another Arrow Diversity and Inclusion Speaker Series. I have two incredible guests here to speak about a very important topic, suicide prevention. I first have Whitney Shumway, board chair for the Missouri chapter for the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. Hello, Whitney. How are you?
I'm well, thank you.
Tell me a little bit more about yourself than what the title that I just said.
Yeah, so I have both my bachelor's and my master's degree in social work from the University of Missouri St. Louis. I work full-time as a prevention consultant and a trainer for various suicide prevention education modules, and do a lot of volunteer work with the Missouri chapter for the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention.
That is incredible work that you do indeed. Jim, hello. We've got a resident from Vitalia Montrose.
Yes.
He is a semi-retired counseling psychologist. Jim, tell me a little bit about yourself.
My partner and I, husband Richard, are residents at Vitalia Montrose. We've been here a little bit over a year and enjoying it very much. I continue to do some psychology counseling work and do volunteer work at a cancer wellness center in the area, leading mindfulness and meditation groups, as well as some caregiver support groups.
Oh, wow. Jim and Whitney, thank you so much for being here with us today. Very heavy topic today, and so we're going to try to keep it as informative and educational as possible. And so let's kind of just jump right into it. Suicide and prevention. Whitney, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so, this is one of the most important topics I can think of that we could possibly cover, especially with September coming up. September is Suicide Prevention Month across the country. And so there will be a lot of activities for hope and healing, as well as just education for the general public happening. So I'm excited to be here today to be able to share and just kind of give some brief information, some good knowledge tidbits, and hopefully encourage folks to seek out more information on their own, as we'll have a lot of things happening nationwide next month.
So Whitney, why do people commit suicide?
In all that I've learned, there really is no one reason, right? Research has showed us that there's no one particular reason that somebody would take their life. It's usually a convergence of several things that are happening that make life extremely painful, whether that's physically, emotionally, mentally, or a combination of the two, that, you know, thinking becomes limited. Individuals are able to problem solve. They're not able to kind of see hope or light at the end of the tunnel. There's no other way to make this pain end. And ultimately that is the commonality in the stories that has been found regarding why somebody takes their own life.
How do suicide rates differ among various groups of people and why?
So there's not a solid reason as to why, right? The field of suicide prevention has only been around for, around 50 years. We're still but a babe compared to so many other health problems that are out there being studied. And so really each age group, there's a different set of risk factors. There's a different set of things happening in that season of life, right? And as time has evolved, those things change. And so a good example is our youth, those that are, ages 10 to 24, right? So when we were kids, the bullying and life was just simpler, right? Things didn't go past the bus ride on the way home, right? I remember as a kid, I would get off the bus and whew, all of that is gone. I don't have to worry about it until the next day. I'm home safe with my family. Kids these days, our youth are plugged in 24/7. There's no reprieve, right? Because if they're not getting those things from school, it's happening on social media. And it's not just school, it's not just in their community now. Now they have people that are able to access them from across the country, from across the world, right? And so those stressors and those factors, there's no reprieve. It is constant. And then you have our middle-aged folks who are starting to experience empty nesting. Maybe they're beginning to retire early, right? And life's purpose is very different. Maybe there was, maybe empty nesting is a thing and they've lost their only child to suicide or a car accident. What is my meaning to life, right? We think about our farmers right now, our middle-aged farmers who were in the middle of a drought, right? Countrywide. Really struggling to make ends meet. You add inflation to all of that. It's a struggle. It's a real struggle. And then we think of our senior citizens and what they're experiencing, right? Again, maybe it's not an early retirement, but it's a later retirement. And now we're facing our bodies not being able to do what they've always done.
Yes.
Right. Maybe we're facing a terminal illness, right? And now we're looking at not being able to care for ourselves. Maybe our memory is going. Maybe dementia is a problem, right? We're not able to stay home alone because it's not safe. What is my purpose? I'm a burden, right? So lots and lots of factors go into that for every age group. What we do know is the 2020 data, 2021 showed that our youth were at a real disadvantage and a real risk. The highest jump was actually for males ages 10 to 24, and it was an 8% increase of a risk of suicide, right? And then preliminary data from the CDC is showing that there's been some improvement regarding the youth. But that preliminary data is really focusing in on an increase for our 65 and older population of almost 8%. Right. And so while we don't necessarily understand what it is that's causing that increase, and I'm sure that we'll find that out as more research is done and the data's, pulled apart and looked at, we know that there is serious risk happening. And so it's really important that we understand that each age group has something different going on, right? Different life circumstances.
Particularly for sexual minorities at this time, with all of the conflict in our society, and more in the last few years, I think particularly those that are doing transition, going transsexual, are really experiencing a lot of high stress and depression because of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Our LGBTQ plus community does have significantly different risk factors, right, than our cisgender heterosexual communities.
Sure.
Unfortunately, there's not a lot of data on that to tell us what that looks like. That's something that we're beginning to see in different risk assessments and things where they're asking about connection to the LGBTQ community, where that hasn't been addressed before, for us to have numbers to be able to speak to that. And so unfortunately, I don't have an answer for that, or numbers, data to be able to speak to. But we do know that, risk factors for the LGBTQ community are severe, and very, very much so real, especially for our trans community, and knowing what's happening across the country with harmful legislation and issues with being able to have gender affirming care and things like that.
Well, if I can speak personally, I had serious thoughts about suicide many years ago when I was coming out midlife, mid-40s, and was married, had 2 teenage children, knew that I was gay, was coming out to myself, and that stress of all those factors, plus a religious background that was, and siblings, family that was not accepting of that, I felt trapped, and I had a motorcycle, and I could go fast, and I could find some way maybe to make it look like an accident so that wasn't considered suicide. But all of those factors, like you mentioned at the beginning, being hemmed in, being feeling that trapped feeling, led me to think about ways that I could end my life and just get out of the pain and the stress of that. So I can speak a little bit from experience with that. And coming out gay was part of the stress for that, but it wasn't all.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that with me, Jim. I know that personal lived experience is hard. It's hard to talk about. And so thank you for that.
Yeah. Is suicide predictable in any way? Can you signs, symptoms of suicide?
Right. So I wouldn't say that it is quote unquote predictable, right? Because every person is different. The way that we see life is different based upon our life experiences, our cultural background, all of those things give us a lens to see things through. But what I would say is that there are behaviors and there are things that we can see, that we can sense from people that can give us some sort of an indication that suicide may be on the table, right? That poor mental health is happening and that they need some assistance. And really that comes in, like I said, one of 3 ways. It comes in talk, it comes in behavior, and mood. So those things that we're going to hear somebody say, maybe something like, it won't matter after this weekend, right? Or something like, I wish I could just go to sleep and not wake up. I can't do this anymore. I'm done.
Yeah.
Right. And then there's those behaviors, those acting recklessly behaviors. And when I talk about behaviors, it's really important that we understand the context of the person, right? So if you have somebody who has always really just seeked out that adrenaline, right? So maybe they have a motorcycle and they go fast on that motorcycle regularly. That's normal for them, right? But if we have somebody who typically doesn't, and now all of a sudden they are acting recklessly on a motorbike, or they just suddenly are acting like they don't have a desire to necessarily die per se, but they're just not careful, right? It's out of context for them with reckless behavior. That's something we would look for. Individuals giving away prized possessions, right? Things that mean something to them, all of a sudden just giving them away. Other behaviors involve sleeping habits. Maybe they begin sleeping all the time, or they aren't able to sleep. Appetite, eating too much or not eating at all anymore. Those types of behaviors, those types of things, again, within context of what is normal for the individual. And then mood, right? And so mood gets a little tricky too, especially for those of us who are parents of teenagers, right? So moods that we think about are irritability, impulsivity, anger. Well, I just described most teenagers, right? And so it's really within the context. What isn't normal for this individual? If we're talking about one of our senior citizens and we think about those same moods, if they've experienced an injury, right, that has left them physically unable to do the things that they've always done, that's kind of normal. But how long does that last? Is it becoming more frequent? Is the depression visible to us, right? Then it's the context of something's really going on here and we need to have a conversation.
So generally, is it true that if they talk about the suicide, they're less likely to do it? I don't know if that's a myth or not, but it's a common thought or belief that if they just start speaking and talking about it, they're less likely to actually make an attempt. Suicide.
Right. And that is something that we hear a lot, right? And it's we usually will hear something like, well, they're attention seeking, right? Yeah. That's typically kind of how that comes about. But the reality is if somebody is talking about suicide, that's real. That is life and death. That is serious. And what we know is that individuals who have thoughts of suicide tend to be ambivalent about suicide. Part of them still very much still wants to live. Part of them is looking for hope. They're looking for a way out of the pain. But the suicide comes in when they cannot see, they cannot think of a way for this to end. It is a way to stop that unbearable pain, that unmeasurable pain. So I would say, yes, if somebody's talking about it, it is absolutely serious, and we need to take it as serious as suicide is.
I think particularly if they have a means or speak about a means of ending their life, whether it's a fake accident or pills or some other, having a gun and that kind of thing, that makes it much more serious.
Right. So anytime an individual would talk about the plan, their lethal means, their access to lethal means, that heightens their risk, right? So if we have somebody who's like, I just wish I could go to sleep and not wake up again, and there's no plan, then we're at low risk at that point, right? But we still need to do something. We still need to interject. We still need to get resources. We still need to get help. But it's when we start hearing about a plan and we start hearing about lethal means that we know that we're at a higher risk and or imminent danger of suicide. And we really do need to get more of that emergency assistance at that time. Being able to get into a clinic or a hospital for evaluation, counseling, if we don't have access to those lethal means, maybe the hospital's not exactly appropriate at that time, but definitely still getting in to see a counselor, psychologist, the doctor, getting the whole team wrapped around for support at that time, for sure.
There's another way of ending life that is more common and becoming more legal now called medical aid in dying, or another term is physician-assisted suicide. Is that really suicide? We tend not to include that with it sometimes.
Right. So this is what I will say about that. I think that there is no hard and fast on that yet. right? As far as like within the community, I think that that is one of those kind of gray areas where we have to determine what the definition of suicide is
Mm-hmm.
for ourselves, right? So we all come to the table with different thoughts, beliefs, attitudes around suicide, every one of us. And it depends on our background, depends on our education on the topic. It depends on our culture, on our spiritual beliefs and things as to what suicide is. And so there's not really a black and white answer to that one. It's kind of a gray introspective area for sure.
Okay. So what treatment options are available for those that are having serious thoughts of suicide?
Yes.
What can be done?
So for those with thoughts of suicide, it varies person to person, right? The same treatment isn't going to be right for me that is right for Jim, and vice versa. For some people, it takes talk therapy, right? For
Mhm.
other people, it takes medication. For others, it takes a combination of the two. And for others, there's other therapy modalities out there like DBT that have been helpful and shown to be helpful for individuals with thoughts of suicide. And so really it varies depending on the person. Step one, though, is always reaching out to medical professions. If you don't already have a counselor, getting on the list for one, getting a referral from one for one, right? And then really kind of going from there, but really wrapping the whole team around you, because suicide is something that it's so complex. It is so complex that it requires a complex system to help heal.
Yeah. I found journaling was very helpful for me. That kind of became my therapist. I wrote and wrote and wrote the argument that was going on inside of me, hearing both sides, was kind of listening to myself, but writing it out and journaling was very helpful to me. But it's very different for every individual as to what is helpful, what we're willing to access. Yeah.
Absolutely. And what we're able to access, right?
Yes.
Depending on what those traumas are, those lived experiences that have helped, unfortunately, bring us to a point of despair and pain like that. Which is, again, why it's so important that we understand that it really is a complex health issue and it requires a complex team to help us through that.
How do you help survivors, family members, their son, daughter, friend committed suicide? What do you do?
Yeah.
Our neighbor did that. Our neighbor across the street, their son, their 25-year-old son committed suicide. We knew them, didn't know them real well. What do you do?
Right. So I think that as people, we inherently want to be helpful and kind and to fix it. But when there is death, whether that is an accidental death or a suicide or any kind of death, we don't know what to do with that. And there really is no way to fix it. There isn't. And so the best thing that we can do is be there.
Yes.
Be there. Be willing to listen, right? Just like with any death, be there.
Yeah.
Be there without judgment. Be there without trying to fix it. Because the reality is there's nothing that we can say that can turn back time, that can fix it and make that hurt go away, right? And so the best thing that we can do is just be present. Just be present and be as helpful as we can be. Sometimes that looks like bringing a meal. Sometimes that looks like helping take the garbage out, right? Or walking the dog. But there are programs out there, such as Healing Conversations through the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. Individuals can contact their local chapter, and it's kind of like a peer-to-peer in a way, in that the volunteers that work through this program, they have had a loss. They've had a suicide loss, and they are far enough away from that loss and into their bereavement and their grieving and things, to be able to go through training to become a peer for somebody else who has experienced a loss by suicide. And so that family can be referred to healing conversations. And then they're kind of paired up with somebody that's had a similar loss. And so they're able to have that peer-to-peer interaction of understanding what this kind of loss feels like, to be able to help them through that.
We don't want to make other people feel uncomfortable.
Right.
So there's an impulse to avoid, evade, not speak of, which is the very worst thing, is to ignore as though it didn't happen. So it's so important to at least say it, say the word, or speak of it in some way, or I'm here for you. What do you need? So that at least it's acknowledged, I think is helpful.
Absolutely, absolutely. Pain wants to be acknowledged, right?
Yes.
Pain wants to be heard. It wants to be seen.
It wants to be accepted.
Yes.
And we can't do those things if we're not being honest and just talking about it. It can feel awkward, right? But talking about poor mental health is awkward because we live in a society where that's what we've created. And so it's important in having conversations just like we're having today to help break down the stigma around that, to be able to have those conversations, right?
If you were aware of a suicide in some friends in the family or so on, and it's, you know, it was suicide, but you're not clear exactly how it happened, how do you ask that question, or is that kind of a no-no?
You know, I would say that it's just not necessary.
Okay.
Right? Those gruesome details, that's just not necessary.
They'll tell you if they want you to know.
Right.
Why is it? It's pretty personal sometimes too.
Yeah, we don't necessarily need to know how somebody takes their life. We need to know that they took their life so that we can be a support to that family member, because something else we know is that losing someone to suicide drives up risk for suicide.
Okay.
Right.
Sure.
And so being that support to them is what is really the most important. You know, and in talking about ways to help family members and things, there's also International Survivors Day of Suicide Loss. And so that's November 18th this year. Across the country, there will be, and across the world, there will be gatherings for individuals who have lost somebody to suicide to come together to find hope and healing in that. There are, you know, peer-led support groups that are out there. And again, folks can go to afsp.org and they can find those resources there. They can find links to those resources there. Should they have lost somebody or know somebody who's lost somebody to suicide and want to be able to help provide some information on those supports.
Is there anything else you would like to add or discuss about your work with suicide prevention?
You know, unfortunately, my work, I've been brought into this field for personal reasons, and that is hard. It's hard work, but it's necessary work. And I just encourage everybody to continue to have these open, honest, real conversations about suicide. Call it what it is. Have the hard conversation. And when you're expressing concern, tell people why you're concerned, right? If it's, you've noticed that they're not sleeping, you've noticed they haven't been at your regular girls' night out, they haven't come to the regular checkers or chess game in the hall, point those things out and let them know, listen, I care and I'm concerned. You know, sometimes when changes like this happen, and people have experienced, you know, this particular event maybe or something that's happened, they're thinking about suicide. Are you thinking about suicide? Be clear and be direct so that you both know what you're talking about, right? But have compassion. Above all else, have compassion and just be present.
and they will know if you care by your tone of voice and by your interest in them with acceptance without any judgment about what happened.
Absolutely. People know genuineness, right?
Yeah.
We know when people really care about us. And so just being real, just being genuine in the moment with folks and calling it what it is, right? And then for anybody who would want to know more, there are a lot of educational programs out there. AFSP offers several different programs, one of which is called Talk Saves Lives. It's about an hour long, a great introduction for various communities, right? We have one for our senior citizen community. We have one for our LGBTQ community. We have some even Latinx for our Spanish speaking communities, right? And that varies into others as well. And then there are additional gatekeeper trainings out there that can teach you how to have this conversation. Some of those are called Safe Talk and Assist, as well as QPR. And then there's also mental health first aid, which is more of an introduction to overall understanding how various disorders affect an individual, right? So kind of introducing you to what depression might look like and how to have a conversation around that, or anxiety, those types of things before a crisis point comes later down the road. So lots of good information out there that is available, and folks can find information through afsp.org, as well as, just by looking up mental health first aid, or livingworks.net. All three of those resources have great information.
There's also a National Alliance on Mental Illness, NAMI, which offers some good resources. And they have local chapters in many states that can be accessed, that you can contact some group, or in your area, perhaps a local chapter that could be helpful.
Yes, AFSP and NAMI do a lot of great work together, chapters across the country for that. There's also the American Association for Suicidology. They have lots of great learning opportunities. There's a wealth of knowledge out there for folks to go and look and become further educated on this topic.
Great. You all have been an absolute joy today to listen to and to share the information that you all have. Thank you so much. Jim, thank you for being a part of this, and thank you for sharing your story as well, and opening up to us. That's huge, and we appreciate and hear you say that. So thank you. And Whitney, thank you so much for taking some time to kind of walk us through this very important topic. And so I appreciate you both. Thank you so much. I guess that'll do it for this episode of our diversity and inclusion speaker series. Is there, I was going to say, if people want to find you, is that a thing? Can people follow what you guys are doing?
Sure.
Yeah. So AFSP is on every social media platform that there is.
Excellent.
You can find AFSP National on any of them. Each chapter for AFSP also has their own identity, like within those platforms. And then really being able to reach out to your local chapters that way. I know, like Jim said, you can also follow NAMI and be able to do that with them as well.
Excellent.
I have a website. I wrote a book about my coming out. The website is crossingthebridgebook.com, and my information is listed there as well as my story. So.
Oh, so cool. I love to be able to cross promote. That's like the best thing. Well, thank you both so much, and we will see you sometime soon in the future. All right?
Thank you.
Thank you. It was good to meet you, Jim.
Nice to meet you, Whitney and Lenny.
and I think to myself, what a wonder